Hello guys, welcome to your English manual. This is the first chapter of our Common Mistakes series. In this series, we will talk about the mistakes that English students often make. And since this is the first chapter of our series, we decided to talk about something that will be the basis for many other topics to come, the difference between a subject and an object of a sentence.
Oh, but why do I need to know that? I never liked that at school. Okay, maybe your first impression wasn't the best, but you'll see that it's actually pretty simple. And to understand a language, you need to understand the concept of subject and object, because this is part of its basic structure.
And believe me, this will help a lot to understand a little more complicated things in the future. Here on this channel, we will always try to give you an excellent base to understand things without any problems later on, okay?
Shall we?
Let's start with the subject. The subject is the one who performs an action. And if we are talking about an action, we are talking about a verb. So if you want to identify the subject of a sentence, first you have to identify the verb. For example, Mary has books. What's the verb in this sentence? To have. Now we have to ask, who is performing the action that the verb is indicating? In this case, we can ask, who is performing the action of having or who has? And the answer is Mary. Therefore, Mary is the subject of the verb to have in this sentence.
Let's see some more examples to understand better. The dogs ate the food. First step, what's the verb? To eat. Second step, who performed the action of eating or who ate? The answer? The dogs. So the dogs is the subject of the verb to eat in the sentence. Another one. My parents want pizza. First step, what's the verb? To want. Second step, who is performing the action of wanting or who wants? Answer, my parents. So my parents is the subject of the verb to want in the sentence.
As you can see in the examples, it is very common for the subject to come before the verb in a sentence, because that's how English, Portuguese, and many other languages are structured.
Yeah, but does it have to be like this? No. You can change the order if you want, but it's not so common and it might sound a little weird. So a tip is, usually the subject comes before the verb.
Now that we already know what a subject is, we only need to know what an object is. But in English, there are two types of objects, the direct object and the indirect object. But don't worry, it's simpler than it sounds. Let's start with the easiest of all, the direct object.
Do you remember that the subject is usually the one who performs an action? Well, the direct object is usually the one who suffers or receives the action. Another way to look at it is to simply look at the verb and ask what or who to it. And the answer will be the direct object.
Let's see the first example we gave. Mary has books. First step, what's the verb? To have. Second step, who is performing the action of having or who has? And the answer is Mary. So, Mary is the subject of the sentence. Now, the last and third step, we can ask, who suffers the action or what does Mary have? And the answer is books. So, books is the direct object of the verb to have in this sentence.
Another example. The dogs ate the food. We already know that the verb is to eat and the subject is the dog. Now, the third step. Who suffered the action of being eaten? Or what did the dogs eat? The answer, the food. Therefore, the food is the direct object of the verb to eat in this sentence. One more example. My parents want pizza. We already know that the verb is to want and the subject is my parents. Now the third step, who suffered the action of being wanted? Or what do my parents want? And the answer is pizza. So pizza is the direct object of the verb to want in the sentence.
As you can see in the examples, it is very common for the direct object to come after the verb, for the same reason as the subject. That's how English, Portuguese, and many other languages are structured.
But it doesn't have to be necessarily like that. You can change the order if you want, but it's not so common it might sound a little weird. So one tip is, usually the direct object comes after the verb.
So far so good? Let's continue. In English, sometimes some verbs affect indirectly another person or thing. In other words, someone ends up receiving something. Let's see an example. If I say, Mary gives her sister books. Let's go. First step, what is the verb? To give. Second step, who is performing the action of giving or who gives? Answer, Mary. So, Mary is the subject of this sentence. Third step, who suffered the action of being given or Mary gave what? Answer, books. So, books is the direct object of this sentence.
But then we have another thing, right? The books suffered the action of being given, but Mary's sister was indirectly affected by this action, wasn't she? After all, she received the books. Now we have a fourth step. Who was indirectly affected by the action of giving the books? Or, Mary gave the books to whom? The answer is our indirect object, which in this case is her sister.
The indirect object is the one that receives the direct object from someone. So there is no indirect object without a direct object, since you can't receive something that doesn't exist, right?
Besides, the indirect object will always come before the direct object. Another tip we can give is that the indirect object is the one that answers the questions to whom or for whom, to what or for what. That's why in the example of Mary, we asked, Mary gave the books to whom? The indirect objects are not so common in English. The direct ones are much more common. But anyways, it always helps to remember to ask the questions, who does? That is the subject, plus action, which is the verb, plus does what? That is the direct object, plus does to, for, whom, or what? That is the indirect object.
Do you guys want to see some examples? Let's analyze the sentence I sent her an email. First step, what is the verb? To send. Second step, who performs the action of sending or who sends? Answer, I. So, I is the subject of the verb to send in this sentence. Third step, who suffered the action of being sent or I send what? Answer, an email. So, an email is the direct object of the verb to send. Fourth step, I send an email to whom? Answer, her. So, her is the indirect object of the verb to send in this sentence.
Another example. She tells me the stories. First step, what's the verb? To tell. Second step, Who performs the action of telling or who tells? Answer, she. So she is the subject of the verb to tell in the sentence. Third step. Who suffered the action of being told, or what did she tell? Answer, the stories. So the stories is the direct object of the verb to tell. Fourth step. She tells the stories to whom? Answer, me. So me is the indirect object of the verb to tell in the sentence.
Before we continue, there is a detail we must talk about. Do you guys remember the rule we just showed you? Who does? That is the subject, plus action, that is the verb, plus does what, that is the direct object, plus does to or for whom or what, that is the indirect object. Do you remember that the indirect object comes before the direct object? Well, sometimes we can swap the position of the direct object with the indirect object. Let's remember the example we said. Mary gives her sister books. It's possible to swap the object. However, in this case, it would be Mary gives books to her sister. You may continue translating to Portuguese the same way if you want. But you must understand that in this case, the preposition to appears. That is a very important detail. It appears because the verb to give needs this preposition in this sentence. But what we want to say is that now her sister is no longer grammatically considered an indirect object. It is now considered just the object of the preposition to. But that is just a name, because it works the same way as the indirect object, so much so that we can ask the same questions to find out what it is. Mary gives books to whom? Answer, her sister. So remember, we can write this sentence two ways. Mary gives her sister books. Here, her sister is the indirect object, or Mary gives books to her sister. Here, her sister is the object of the preposition to, but their meaning is still the same, okay?
Let's see some other examples to make sure. Let's analyze the sentence, she told me the truth. First step, the verb is to tell. Second step, the one who told is she, so she is the subject. Third step, she told the truth, so the truth is the direct object. Fourth step, she told the truth to whom is me, so me is the indirect object. Now let's change the order. Okay? Now see again that the preposition to appears. It appears because the verb to tell requires it in this case. It's the same thing. She told me the truth. Me is the indirect object, or she told the truth to me. Me is the object of the preposition to.
Another example. I buy my son books. First step, the verb is to buy. Second step, the one who buys is I, so I is the subject. Third step, I buy books, so books is the direct object. Fourth step, for whom do I buy books? Is my son, so my son is the indirect object. Now let's change. I buy books for my son. In this case, the preposition for appears because the verb to buy needs this preposition. The preposition may be different, but the result is still the same. I buy my son books. My son is the indirect object. Or I buy books for my son. My son is the object of the preposition for.
Usually when you change the order, you will put either the preposition to or the preposition for. They are the most common ones. However, there is only one more detail you need to know. When the direct object is an object pronoun, you will necessarily have to make this inversion, okay?
For example, we can say both I buy my son books and I buy books for my son, since the direct object books is not a pronoun. But if we substitute books for the object pronoun them, the only possible way to say this is changing the order. Therefore, we could only say I buy them for my son. We could not say I buy my son them. It even sounds weird.
We'll explain about object pronouns in another video, okay?
To finish, let's give the answer to today's challenge. Who is the subject of this sentence here you are? Well, even though here is before the verb, it is not the one who is performing the action of being, right? Who is doing that is you. Therefore, you just need to ask the verb, who is here? And then you will know the answer. You is the subject of this sentence.
So that's it, guys. We really hope you liked the video and learned a lot, okay? To make sure you understand well, we recommend you practice not to make any mistake. To help, we put a list of exercises in the description of this video. If you liked, please leave a like and share this video. Okay, you can help us help more people to learn it. Okay, see you next video.